Good afternoon, everyone. So here we are, all sitting nicely, meditating, watching our breath, mind totally focused, the background noise, the background thinking, not stopped, but just calmly going on in the background, no longer a tumultuous waterfall, more like a steady flowing river. Yes? Yes. And the mind, meantime, like a searchlight, ignoring all the outer disturbances, inner disturbances, and focused one pointedly on its object. So, as I say, here the main object for practicing shamatha is twofold: to allow the mind to calm down, at least somewhat, because at the same time we are developing this quality of mindfulness. So in a way, it's as if we were bifurcating the mind. We were drawing back from the surface mind, developing this quality of awareness or mindfulness, right? So the mind is there in the background, but in the forefront is this attention on the object, whatever object, right? As I said, we all can do this. We know very well that if we are focusing on anything that we are doing, if we are doing it with one pointed concentration, whatever is happening around us, we just ignore it. You know, any artist, any musician, anyone with a skill knows this, that we can do this. So here we are concentrating on a very plain object, which has been the rise and fall of the breath. So assuming that now we are able to stay focused for some time, and we have a real sense of that awareness which is not immersed in the thinking. Usually Tibetans say that if you can keep the mind easily focused on the breath for at least 21 breaths, then that's a good enough indication that during 21 breaths the mind doesn't go off, it stays focused on the breath, and it feels it could do more if it needed. It just is settled now on the breath. So at that point, we take this searchlight of attention away from the external object and turn it inward onto the mind itself. So now what we are going to use as our object of mindfulness or attention is the thinking mind, the conceptual mind, which is compared to, at this point still, a swiftly flowing river. Now, normally, our mind stream and our attention are synonymous. In other words, we flow along with our mind. We are submerged in our mental current, bobbing up and down on the waves. sometimes down, other times completely drowning, other times, but always soaking wet from riding under, being dragged along by our thinking mind, our emotional mind, just that mind current which never stops. So now we are going to look at that situation. This is very important because everything that we do and say and think depends on thoughts. We don't say anything or do anything without a prior intention. Even if that intention is very fast, and normally we're not even conscious of it, we say, oh, I just spoke without thinking. That is not literally true. There was an intention there, even though it might be just, instantaneous. So our thinking and predetermines our speech and our actions. And also we swim, changing the analogy from a river to an ocean, we swim in a sea of thought, mostly on the surface, caught up with the waves going up, the waves going down, but like a fish, we are so completely immersed and submerged in our mental world, we don't even recognize it as water with the fish. And so it's very important to understand this. We think that our mental world is something locked up in our brain, but it's so much vaster than that. For example, neuroscientists now are showing that the actual input that we receive through our sense organs, like our eyes and ears and nose, etc., is actually very rough. I mean, the eyes themselves cannot see a strawberry, right? All the eye consciousness, the input it will get is a vague color shape. That's it. The sixth consciousness, the five sense consciousness, eyes, ears, nose, taste, etc., they only get this rough input coming through. The sixth consciousness, which is our mind, the mental consciousness, zaps in, says it's red, and then names it even, and says, strawberry. And it doesn't just do that. It then says, I like strawberries, I don't like strawberries. Right? Instantaneous, very fast. And so it's the mind that gives meaning to this very rough input that we receive through our sense doors. We get the perception, but then immediately the mind starts liking, disliking, naming, labeling. All our memory store comes up about our feelings about the object. Has nothing to do with the object. The object is just an object, but we immediately color it and tone it and decide whether we like it or don't like it, whether, our past experience with such an object before, and so forth. It's very fast, but that's all thought. Do you understand? We project our world, which is why some people like strawberries, some people don't. It's nothing to do with the strawberry. It's to do with our thoughts about the strawberry. So that's the outer world. People we like, people we don't like, people who are friends, people who are enemies. It's all thought. Who we are is a thought based on our memories and our identification with those memories. That makes us who we are. Gives us a history. But it's all thought. Often if somebody recounts something which happened some time ago, and then you listen to another person's account of those same happenings, you think they're talking about two different things. Because it all depends on our perception, how we saw it, and then after that, how we digested it and how we think about it. So beyond that is our internal world, which is, again, like a television which we can never turn off. And so rather than always just relaying the same old soap operas with ourselves in the starring part, we are now going to sit back on the sofa and watch the drama, recognizing it's just a drama that we're watching. The traditional analogy, since they didn't have TVs back then, is of someone sitting on the banks of the river watching the river flow by. Normally, we are in the river, right? This is very important to recognize. So this is a big step when we no longer are carried, swept, not stopping the river, we're not damming it up, we're not saying bad river, we're allowing the river to flow, but we are stepping out and just sitting down and saying, okay, let's see what's going on. So this ability to observe or witness the mind is a very important step. It is not ultimate reality, because the mind is still dualistically caught up. There is an observer and an observed. Ultimate nature of the mind goes beyond that duality. But it's a very important step. And in fact, we cannot get back to the nature of the mind really without first developing this quality of mindfulness. Mindfulness is a very important level to attain to. Most people have a problem, not so much with the inability to watch the mind, as that they find the mind is so boring that they say, okay, I'm watching the mind. Oh God, it's so boring. You know, when can we get on to the next bit? Because really, it's like the mind, once we start watching what it's saying, it's so unoriginal. And it just plays the same old, it's like, you know, I don't know, in America you would say it's playing Casablanca for the 1000th time, you know. It's just playing, especially the more dramas, you know, the more tear-jerking, the better. And always there one is suffering in the major role. And one begins to see, you know, really, does the mind ever think of anything creative? Why are we endlessly replaying and replaying these old scenarios? Or caught up in fantasies, caught up in daydreams? Why is the mind so disinclined to just rest in the moment? Or at least be a little bit more, as I say, a little bit more original, a little bit more creative, you know? Think something new. But anyway, apart from the content, the important thing is that we begin to learn how to observe. And we begin first to just recognize we are not the mind, because we can see the mind, we can observe it. Therefore, we are not the contents of the mind. If we were, then we would not be able to observe the mind. The fact that we can step out and actually observe it shows that we have levels of consciousness which produce these thought flow, but it's not the thought flow. Like the clouds in the sky, we can have thick clouds, and they come from the sky, they go back into the sky, and yet the sky is more than that. So our thoughts are part of the brain circuit, but the fact that we can know that shows that there is something beyond just the brain circuit. So again, the important thing is first to connect with our ability to be mindful. And mindful here means that we keep the attention. So it's like, it really is like a searchlight of being attentive, of being single-pointedly concentrated. Because unless we have that, we have developed that sense of being this single-pointed concentration, there's nothing to turn back on the mind, if you understand. So first we have to have the ability to observe. Then that is not so difficult, really. And then to turn that observation back in on itself and just sit back. Don't tense up. At first, sometimes people are so tense that it's like the thoughts are all stage shy. You know, it's like if you have a stage with the searchlight in the middle, and then the thoughts are huddling in the wings, afraid to come in, you know. So just give them a bit of time, they'll come. But just relax. And just sit back and just observe the thoughts. Don't judge the thoughts. It's not a matter here of good thoughts, bad thoughts, high thoughts, low thoughts. A thought is just a thought. I will say that, at a certain point also comes when, this is all shamatha. This is all shamatha practice. This calm abiding practice is part of the shamatha. Later comes an insight level of vipassana where one starts to question the mind. What is a thought? Where do the thoughts come from? Where do they go to? Where are they located? What is a thought? Who is thinking? Is that awareness which observes the mind when it's moving and observes the mind when it's still. So these three, when the mind is usually moving, when the mind is quiet and rested, and that awareness which notes the two of them, are they the same? Are they different? And who is thinking? If we say, I am thinking, great. Who am I? But that comes in Vipassana. Right now, we are just not worrying about asking ourselves any questions. All we are doing now is just observing. We are witnessing the mind. So just relax the mind, let it run along happily by itself. No problem. This is its moment. It's never had so much attention in its life. We're giving it full stage. Just think and observe the thinking. Okay? Don't try to change it, alter it, stop it, speed it up. Just know it. Just observe. Okay, can we try to do that? So again, we'll give it about 10-15 minutes. Just first get the mind, bring the attention to the breathing for a few minutes, just to get hold of your attention. And then turn that in and just look at the mind. That's all. If one gets swept along by fascination with the thoughts, fine, step back on the bank again. Right? However much one gets swept away, just bring oneself back. No blame, no guilt, don't despair. Just relax. Just relax and look. So in the Tibetan tradition, it is considered the essential teaching is to learn to observe the mind at all times. And they take this very seriously. All times means all times, even while we're asleep. They have special meditations just for while you're asleep in order to keep the awareness going so we don't fade away. And advanced practitioners say that yes, they can keep the awareness all during the day and all during sleep. The tricky bit is the part just as you fall asleep until you go into the sleep consciousness and waking up. Those two moments that sometimes their attention breaks. So I think we can agree we have all got a long way to go. But in the meantime, it's even if we cannot keep our attention all day long, we can, from time to time throughout the day, just look at the mind. In this moment, what is the mind doing? Because what our mind is doing colors our whole day, colors our whole life. And so therefore, if we habitually dwell in negative states, our life will be negative. If we recognize these negative states and make the effort to try to replace them with more positive feelings, then our life will become more positive, not just for ourselves, but for those who are connected with us. So everything springs from our mind, and therefore it's very important for us to really know what's going on in there, and then really, do some work on it. I mean, truly, that's where we live. If our house gets dingy and filled up with junk and, endless trash, so we can hardly move, we would definitely try to do something to clean up, throw out the trash, paper the walls, open the windows, get some air in there. But, really the place we live is in our own mind. So why don't we do that with our mind? Look, sort through, throw out the junk, throw out the trash, open the windows, clean up a bit, bring in some nice flowers, aerosol. we live in our minds. So let us make an effort to have a mind which is a pleasure to dwell in, because we cannot escape it. You know, we are trapped in the prison of our mind. What we are trying to do is find the key to release us from that prison. But meantime, we should at least make sure that the prison is clean and well decorated before we find the way to go beyond the prison of our brain mind. So we have to also be a little bit careful of what we take into our minds. You know, what the programs we watch on television and the things which we read and so forth, you know, because they settle in the mind. And so we should be a little discriminating. What do we want to allow into our minds? And how are we processing our thoughts, our memories, our ideas? Do we ever challenge ourselves with our own prejudices? So there's a lot of work which we can do. Even if we're not the world's great meditators, we can nonetheless work at really looking to see what is the state of our mind and how to transform those states of mind which cause us to be negative or to be upset, depressed or angry, and so on, which do not make for a happy, peaceful mind, for ourselves or for others. We cannot really change ourselves if we don't know what's going on inside. So this ability to observe the mind, to witness our thoughts without being swept along by them, just see the thoughts are thoughts. Some thoughts are very useful thoughts, nice thoughts, helpful thoughts. Some thoughts are very negative and counterproductive and cause us pain and cause pain to others. Well, the only person that can deal with all of this is ourselves. Nobody can do it for us. And so we have to look at the state of our mind and decide, you know, those things which we need to work on, and those things, it's like a garden. If you go to, you have a garden, then, you know, the weeds grow happily. We don't have to cultivate weeds. Nobody sows weeds. They just grow. Isn't it interesting? You know, we don't say, oh, weed, how beautiful, please grow. We don't sing to it. We don't play Mozart. Nothing. But the weeds grow anyway, happily. Whereas the plants, the flowers that we want, you know, we have to take care of them, we have to prune them, we have to water them, we have to fertilize them, we have to encourage them along. So that's like our mind. The weeds grow happily. We don't have to cultivate the weeds. But we have to take care of the good plants. We mustn't overlook the good plants. So while we are trying to uproot the weeds and maybe use them as compost, we also have to encourage the good plants, our kindness, our generosity, our compassion, our empathy. That needs attention. That needs to be encouraged, along with noting the negative frame of our mind, which needs to be recognized and accepted. Yes, I don't like this, or this upsets me. Fine, good, now we know. We recognize it and we accept it, and then we can see this is a negative state of mind. And we work to transform it, to change it, to replace it with a more useful mind. We don't suppress it or pretend we don't feel like that. But what we do is, having recognized it, then we work with it. I mean, much of the path, yes, you say it agrees. It's always agreeing. So much of the path is dealing skillfully with the negative states of our mind, rather than seeing these negative states, like our greed and our anger and jealousy and so forth, as the obstacles to our path, that I would be such a lovely person if it were not for. We recognize that this is the path. The path is looking at the negative in us and then transforming it, as well as cultivating that which comes easy to us, the good things in us which are easy for us. Yes, we cultivate those because we need flowers. We're not just de-weeding. But at the same time, that's what being a gardener is all about. You know, it's seeing to that the garden is kept clean and clear. So much of the instruction on the path is how to deal with our negative emotions. That becomes the path. That's how we make progress. Just as, you know, if we were also perfect, we wouldn't need a path. We'd be there. The fact that we need to walk is because we haven't quite arrived yet. But nonetheless, all our faults and imperfections, all the problems we have in our mind are what we work with. That's what makes us strong. So this is why it's very important to begin honestly to look at the mind. And while we are sitting in meditation, we don't judge the mind, we just observe it. But at other times, we can see those feelings and thoughts which are negative. We recognize it. We need to recognize it before they then come into our speech and our actions, or that we keep encouraging them more and more, throwing oil on the fire. We recognize it as soon as we can, and then we apply an antidote, which is a whole other subject, which we're not dealing with right now. So now tomorrow we will carry on with this subject. Today we will now change to the second of the Brahma Viharas, which is that of compassion. In Buddhism, compassion is an extremely important component of the path. It is said that compassion conjoined with wisdom, of course we have to, not idiot compassion, but wise compassion, are like the wings of a bird. A bird needs to have two wings to fly. And so mere wisdom with no corresponding opening of the heart is a very dry wisdom. And with compassion, without clearly seeing, without understanding the situation completely from a very profound level, just ends up being emotionalism and becoming burned out because they feel too much, but it's not balanced by clearly seeing. And so the two go together. The two are very important. But here we are dealing with the compassion side. So compassion means basically to suffer with someone. In other words, that the suffering, the pain of another, we feel it as our own. And so this is, of course, a very important quality for opening up the heart and recognizing our common bonds. And it can be, of course, practiced in many ways, but for the sake of this, we will concentrate on the practice of what is called Tonglen. Now, does anybody here not know what Tonglen is? Okay, good. So Tonglen is a Tibetan term and literally means giving and taking. And the basic meditation is very simple. One imagines, one thinks of or has in front of oneself, if one is visiting hospital or somebody who is sick, or if you're home, you can use a photo. One has the object is someone who is suffering. So this suffering could be physical suffering, they might be ill or dying, or mental suffering. Whatever they're suffering, bring to mind somebody who you care about in the beginning, because that's easier. Bring to mind somebody that you care about who is suffering. And then with the in-breath, imagine that all their suffering and the causes, the karma that created that suffering is sucked into oneself with the ingoing breath in the form of dark light or smoke, something very dark, like a vacuum cleaner, right? So with the in-breath, one visualizes that one is sucking out all their suffering and the causes of that suffering, and it is coming into oneself in the form of a dark light. It comes down and it hits at the center of one's chest. A little, again, Tibetans like to visualize things. So here it's a little black pearl, a little dark black pearl here at the center of the heart, which represents our self-cherishing mind. The self-cherishing mind says, I'm so sorry you're suffering, but I'm glad it's you, not me. One of the questions which always comes up with this meditation is, yes, this is wonderful, but it doesn't really work, does it? Because yes, we want people to be free of suffering, but we don't want it ourselves. So this sense that we would not rejoice if their sickness came to us, even if they were released from that sickness, is considered our self-concern, our self-cherishing mind. So the fact that we are doing this, that we are taking their sickness and its causes into ourselves, hits directly at the ego, which absolutely doesn't really want this to be happening, right? So therefore, because it's going counter to the ego's desires, it creates that the ego then dissolves and is immediately transformed into either a very bright pearl or like a little diamond, which is our original nature here. We're back to, as in loving kindness, where we had this diamond which represented our original mind, the clear light nature of the mind. So here again it appears that the reason why we do not access to the true nature of our mind is because it's obscured by our egoistic self-concern, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? The little self guards against, like a dragon, it's guarding the treasury of our true nature. Doesn't want anybody in there. So by opening the heart with compassion to take in the suffering of another, we are crushing that self-concern, that self-defense. And as a result, it transforms into our true nature. Once the ego goes, our true nature shines forth. And so this diamond then sends out with the breath this golden or white light, which then absorbs into the object of our concern, of our meditation, and they become healthy and happy. All our health, good fortune, the infinite goodness potential which we have is given to this person, and they are revived and well. So with the in-breath we take in the darkness, with the out-breath we give out the light. So I will give you a story to illustrate that this is just not thinking. This is more than beyond that. When I was about 8 years old, I was brought up in London. And my mother, she ran a shop, but she also suffered from kidney stones, which are really one of the most painful things you can have. Extremely agonizing, I'm told. And so she was ill, and she was therefore in her bedroom. Otherwise, I wouldn't be telling you this story. So I was about 8 years old, and I was getting ready to go to school. And my ball hit against an electric fire, and I bent down to pick up the ball, and my skirt, which was nylon, caught fire. So I was all up in flames because it was a nylon dress, so it immediately just went whoosh. And I remember running up the stairs, screaming, of course, and running into my mother's bedroom. And then she put out the flames, and I think she said my whole back was just one big blister. And she put on, I think, some penicillin, in which she wrapped me in a clean sheet. Meantime, I had left the body, and I was up on the ceiling looking down. And, you know, it was one of these very typical near-death experiences. There were all these beings of light saying, come with us, come with us. And I thought, oh, good, I'm going to die. Oh, that will be interesting. Let's see how that... I mean, I absolutely wanted to go with the spirits of light. I looked down on my little burned out body, and I didn't want to go down there. I wanted to go with these beings up there. But meantime, the neighbors had heard my screams. So they came in. They started coming in to find out what on earth had happened. And suddenly I felt myself down in the body again. Next thing I remember, I was in a hospital lying on a trolley, and the doctor said to me, oh, you're a very brave little girl. You must be in enormous pain. And I said, no, there's no pain. And he looked at me kind of funny. He didn't say anything. But, you know, even if we burn the tip of our finger, how painful that is. My whole back was burned off. There was no pain. And I stayed in hospital for a number of weeks, of course. And actually, I look back and I remember I had fun because I wasn't sick. And I was too young to understand this was strange, you know. And the nurses and doctors all thought I was terribly brave, stoic little girl. And I have no scars. Anyway, many years later, I spoke about this with my mother. And she said that at the time when I was lying there on the bed unconscious, actually she was a spiritualist. We held seances in our house every week. So she prayed to the spirit guides. And she said, please don't let her die. And please don't let her have pain. She's too young for this pain. Give her pain to me. I will take all her pain. Just don't let her suffer. I want to suffer in her stead. She was already in agony with her kidney stones. But if she could have taken my pain on as well, she would have rejoiced if I had been free. isn't it? So I'm sure because of that really pure intention from her side, something decided that I did not need to have the pain. She did not get it, but neither did I. So she was doing Tonglen. She didn't know it. But as the Buddha said, just as a mother loves her child, her only child, so must you love all beings. That is the genuine Tonglen, where if you could take that suffering, you would just rejoice to be able to relieve that being of. So this is what we're talking about. Now, I'm sure all of you parents would know exactly how that feels for your child. Or those of you who have someone that you love very much, you know that you would gladly take on their pain. So one starts with that, right? One starts with arousing that feeling, that genuine feeling of how happy you would be to take on the pain of another, right? Then comes the tricky part. Then, from the loved one, we move on to someone who we don't really care about one way or the other too much, but of course we don't want them to suffer. But do we really want their suffering? So then we practice also trying to think of somebody that we feel, we don't want them to suffer. Of course we don't, but we don't want their suffering either. Watch that one. And how the resistance comes up and how genuine we can begin to open up. And then, of course, the ultimate challenge of someone who we really regard as the enemy. Someone whom we really don't, we would be happy if they suffered. Of course, none of you here has anybody like that, but... And work on it. Right? This is a practice, a very direct practice for slowly working at creating unconditional compassion. You all understand this. I don't need to go on about it. But it has other aspects too. One is that one, for example, one can use this very helpfully if one is with somebody. For example, people are sick in hospital and one doesn't know what to do. You sit there feeling helpless. Well, you can sit there doing Tonglen. And often, you don't have to tell them what you're doing, of course, but just breathing in and breathing out like this. And oftentimes people say that as a result, they feel inwardly much better. What did you do? And even doctors and nurses say that the atmosphere in the room changes because somebody has been sitting there doing this practice. Mind is very powerful. We all know that. If you visit a place of pilgrimage where genuinely saintly people have been, it has a very special atmosphere. We all know that. And if one visits a place where, very terrible things happened, that also has a very special atmosphere. You don't have to know what happened there. When, for example, I was in Poland and we went with Tibetan children to visit Auschwitz, one didn't need to know what went on in Auschwitz to know that this was a really very heavy, dark, terrible place. There was nothing to see, just big rooms, and yet you knew That there was like the atmosphere was so heavy, not only from what happened in Auschwitz, but from the grief in subsequent years of everyone who went there. It was palpable. Just as if one goes to, like, you know, a sacred place where people go to pray and rejoice, then that also, you know, lightens the spirits. And so thought has a great deal of power, much more than we give it credit for. And so therefore this Tonglen, even though we're not doing anything, we're just sitting there, taking in the darkness, giving out the light. It can be tangible almost. The other thing is that if we ourselves are suffering from some problems or some disease, one can do it that way too. Many practitioners and lamas, when they are very ill, when they are dying, when people ask them, Rinpoche, what are you doing? What practices are you doing? They usually mention Guru Yoga and Tonglen. So when Tonglen, if you're sick, for example, if one has, you know, I don't know, migraines or cancer or any, you know, real sickness, then one can visualize taking in all the cancer of the world, like if one had some kind of cancer, taking that all into oneself and giving out one's primordial good health towards all the other beings, the willingness to take it all onto oneself, if only others could be free. So the point is that it doesn't end up making us feel depressed. Actually, it makes us feel that our sickness is worthwhile. How wonderful if I alone could suffer and everyone else was free. So it takes us away from being obsessed in self-pity and fear about me and my suffering, and opens it up so that it's a wonderful opportunity for practice at that time. That all the sufferings of other beings who are suffering like this, let it all come to me. I will be happy to have that if they themselves could be free. So in this way, also if one has had, for example, a very abusive childhood, or we have some real heavy trauma in our life which we cannot get beyond, then again one can do Tonglen, visualizing oneself as a child or at the time of the trauma, and again taking in the darkness, giving out the light. This can actually be very therapeutic if one does it sincerely. So all of this is a way of opening the heart to the suffering of others, and genuinely wishing that they be relieved of suffering. Even if, as a result, oneself had to suffer, one would be happy for that. So it does two things. One thing is that it starts to open up the heart towards empathy for all other beings out there. And at the same time, it begins, if we do it sincerely, to erode our ego, which doesn't want to suffer and is sorry for others, but nonetheless is, as I say, is always thinking, well, I'm really sorry you're suffering, but you know, you keep your suffering, I don't want it. And so in this way, it's a very profound practice, because it's helping us to come back, to erode away our selfish concerns for our self-preservation, and at the same time opening up the heart towards empathy and feeling towards others. So this is a practice which was introduced into Tibet by somebody called Palta in the 10th century. He was a Bengali scholar. And it has been taken into all traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. It's not just, and now also in the West, more and more people are doing this. You know, in the Buddhist world, Zen people and Theravadins, etc., all the Buddhist world has kind of clued in on the benefits of Tonglen, because apart from its ability to really help others, it also works directly on our selfish, ego-clinging mind, which is our chief obstacle on the path. So it's a very profound practice, actually. And again, when we start, it normally feels very artificial. We don't believe it, we resist it. It doesn't, you know, all sorts of things come up. And so this is very good to be patient and just keep at it again and again and again until it really begins to work at a deep level and transform our attitude. So what's the time here? Okay, so we'll just do this for a few minutes and then we'll open it up to questions. So here I would suggest that you concentrate on somebody that you care for who is suffering at this time, either physically or mentally or both. And so with the in-breath, one takes in the dark light of their suffering and the causes of their suffering, not just the physical causes, but the karmic causes. And with the out-breath, and then that dissolves into this little black pearl of self-cherishing mind. Then that pearl, as it absorbs the light with the in-breath, immediately transforms into like a diamond-like brightness, which is our genuine nature, which can never be polluted, no matter how much darkness is absorbed. The nature of the mind is never polluted, never affected. And so that transforms. When the ego disappears, then the nature of the mind blazes forth. And so through this, the ego, then the little pearl gets smaller and smaller, diamond-like nature of the mind, the clear light nature of the mind. And then that on the out-breath goes out as golden white light and then completely saturates the person that we are visualizing and bringing them health, happiness, well-being, all good things. And so with the in-breath, the darkness, with the out-breath, the light.